Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's streaming we are not taking a lot of time, I guess. We are talking about the recent Pauper metagame. Storm seems to be still a thing. And then we are talking about the recent MOCS results and the first previews of the new Magic expansion that we will able to see in April. New Capenna. I'm kind of worried about the current metagame, mostly because Storm in the last 2 weeks it came back, and we can't really have Storm legal in Pauper. Basically, Pauper Storm is Pauper Legacy without Diabolic Tutors and without lead. Lions is Diamond, which is the most resembling thing to Black Lotus. Okay, you need to discard your hand to add 3 mana, but it's still a Legacy Black Lotus. Pauper Storm seemed to be not playable without Shatterstorm, and for that reason Wizard did not ban Galvanic Relay. But right now, Galvanic Relay has shown that it's a proper win condition for Storm. Basically, the most worrying thing about Galvanic Relay was to be able to find a proper win condition. Initially, people started playing Blooding Blight Priest plus Weather the Storm, but the deck was kind of weak to removal spells and graveyard 8, especially since you weren't really able to go too much long for a game. Since if you exile too many cards with Galvanic Relay, your deck out. Oops, I forgot about the banner. Sorry. Well, anyway. Thanks to Feldon's Cane, there's no more the problem about decking yourself. Feldon's Cane, I think that's the greatest addition to the deck, and I tried this deck without Feldon's Cane and with more copies of Casting Flamebreather some months ago. I wasn't really impressed by that Storm, because you don't really want to play more than 4 copies of Casting Flamebreather. Firebrand Archer is not necessary, and I found that having only 3 copies of Casting Flamebreather is kind of enough, especially if you main deck at least 1 copy of Feldon's Cane. I think that you don't really need to be worried anymore about grindy matchups thanks to Feldon's Cane. You can and against aggressive deck you weren't really worried, because you are able to cast a Galvanic Relay by turn 2 or turn 3 and then win the next turn. Basically, this deck is kind of weak to very aggressive decks, because Galvanic Relay needs at least 2 turns to win. But Galvanic Relay isn't really the only Storm spell in the format, and Weather the Storm is staple since its print in Modern Horizon 1. Also was played alongside Marauding Blight Priest initially, and maybe it seems to be time to go back to Marauding Blight Priest plus Weather the Storm, because some Storm lists are going back to main decking Weather the Storm. The reason is obviously those aggressive decks like Stompy, Buggles, Burn, even also Affinity. For that reason, you may think that going back to Marauding Blight Priest instead of Casting Flamebreather can be better. Obviously, you need more time and more cards to set up your Blight Priest combo, but I think that the proper win condition of this deck is Galvanic Relay, so you don't really care about your win condition if casting Volume Breather or whether the Stone Plus Marauder Blight Priest. Anyway, I think that for the end of this month we will see a Galvanic Relay ban. It's just a question of time, it's just a matter of time. Anyway, if we take a look at the other part of the metagame, we are going back to something similar to 2016 Pauper. Tron seems to not be playable anymore because the metagame is too much fast and too much differentiate to play Tron. Tron is probably the best control deck when you are able to set up for a specific kind of deck. And when the most played decks are Affinity, Mono Blue Delver, and other beatdown decks, you are not really able to slot bot 8 for Fairies and bot 8 for aggro. You can try to fight Affinity by playing both Moment's Peace and Weather the Storm, because Weather the Storm is great against Affinity, the current Affinity, but is kind of difficult to interact well with all of these decks. The metagame seems kind of weird from my point of view, because Monarch seems to not be anymore a problematic card. If you guys know that how much I hate the Monarch mechanic, you can figure out how much I'm surprised to not see Monarch as a problematic card, because the most played decks really doesn't care about Monarch anymore. Basically, Affinity, Fairies and Boros can generate enough card advantage that they don't really require anymore the Monarch. Especially Boros with Synthesizer doesn't really want to play anymore the Monarch. Monarch costs 4 mana, and 4 mana are a lot when you play only 20 lands, or you want to go as aggressive as possible, because you really want to start playing and starting get advantage from Experimental Synthesizer as fast as possible, usually by turn 3 or turn 4. So playing Experimental Synthesizer on turn 5 because you want to exile a Palace Sentinel or Battle Screech is not really great. Not the best way to play Synthesizer. Also, prismatic cards like Prismatic Strength that were great with Palace Sentinel in the first interaction of Burst Metalcraft are just bad with Experimental Synthesizer. Another cool thing that we will be able to see in Burst Metalcraft, is Makeshift Munitions. Right now, with a more aggressive shell, with cards like Seeker of the Weir or Ardent Recruit or Cool Daughter Bird, Makeshift Munitions is just great. You can sacrifice cards like Icon Wellspring to get extra card advantage, or cards like Experimental Synthesizer, because Synthesizer is so much good that you can generate card advantage both when you bring it back with Glint Talk and when you destroy it with Makeshift Munitions. So this deck is more aggressive compared to the old Boros Metacraft and can still generate a crazy ton of card advantage. Probably we need something for the mirror match to break the mirror match by generating more card advantage and to not rely too much to Experimental Synthesizer, because when we are playing a Boros Metacraft mirror match, basically you lose when your opponent are able to find Experimental Synthesizer before you. And I played a lot of Boros Metacraft mirror match. The mirror match seems kind of good if you are winning. It's it's enjoyable if you are able to win, but it's really not enjoyable at all if you're losing consistently. It's not really brainless, because sometimes, for example, you exile a Crossky Fisher and you don't have enough mana to cast the spell you are meant to exile when you're bringing back your synthesizer. So you can play your Crossky Fisher and bounce something different than experimental synthesizer, but not always a Nihor Wildspring or a Traben Inspector. You can also bounce a Glintook or a Crossky Fisher, because by bouncing a Crossky Fisher or a Glintook, you are bouncing back a Null Drifter instead of a creature or a card that generate only a 2-for-1. I usually really love that part of the deck, but probably isn't really probably you don't really do that a lot of times. I don't really like the addition of 4 copies of Dust to Dust in this deck. I still prefer Gorilla Shaman. Since Gorilla Shaman, it costs only 1 mana, and I think that is better to destroy the Traben Inspector tokens or cards like Experimental Synthesizer, eventually their lands, and is still a creature, so you can force your opponent to waste all spells on your Gorilla Shaman. Dust to Dust doesn't seem really great, since it's a 3 mana spells, and you don't really want to play too many 3 mana spells in this kind of deck. It's just my opinion. Huh? Another weird thing for the metagame, I think that Affinity is now a control-ish or mid-range deck. Doesn't really get a lot of turn 5 or turn 4 win condition, wins, but you can still get those, especially thanks to Disciple of the Vault, Frogmite, or Crackling Shaman, if you have a couple of Disciple of the Vault on the battlefield. And I'm kind of weirded by how the Affinity deck started to main deck Crackling Shaman just to randomly kill, just to be able to randomly kill you with Disciple of the Vault. And I think that having a Crackling Shaman main deck just to kill you with Disciple of the Vault means that the artifact lands are truly powerful in the format. I think that we will see at least another ban in Pauper Affinity in this year, but in my opinion would be better eventually to cut the artifact lands, the color of the artifact lands. But I know that the artifact lands are a lot of cards, something like 15 cards. Cutting both the bridges and the Mirrodin lands seems too many cards. Probably a good part of Pauper is being able to play the artifact lands. So I'm not really sure how the Affinity Pauper will eventually evolve, or the format playing around Affinity will eventually evolve. Well, right now we are sure that the most played version, that is Mono Blue Fairies, is the reason why people is playing Mono Blue Fairies, or at least Affinity is partially the reason why people plays Mono Blue instead of Izzet or Dimir, because Mono Blue Fairies seems to be well positioned against Affinity. Meanwhile, Izzet and Dimir are bad positioned against Affinity, because card advantage doesn't really matter a lot of times against Affinity, because Affinity can generate more card advantage than you that are playing Affinity, that you are playing Fairies. And you prefer to have a lot of flying creature, and Affinity does interact well with flying creatures, and you also prefer to have more 1 mana counter spells to interact with their card advantage, or with their makeshift munitions or Mirror Enforcers. So basically trying to kill their creatures, and then landing a monarch seems to not be enough anymore. And affinity obviously is part of the reason why monarch doesn't seem doing a lot of results right now. I think that affinity is also the reason why more late games mid-range decks are not showing any more results in Pauper. For example, Jand or Mono Black Devotion that are traditional style mid-range in Pauper aren't really great in the current metagame. Maybe they are well positioned against Fairies or against Boros, especially Jand. Jand seems to be good against Boros, but against Affinity, I think that Affinity is much more just destroy Jand. If Jand is more aggro oriented compared to Affinity, but doesn't have any free mana creatures like Affinity, it relies on 2-for-1 creatures like Burning Party, or Packmate, or Ulbiar. If you compare Affinity to Jand, Affinity generates more card advantage. So most times decks like Boros or Jand trying to be the aggro deck in the matchup against Affinity, it seems kind of weird compared to all Affinity used to be in Pauper. And yeah, that's the reason why the current Pauper metagames seems weird to me. But it's probably enjoyable. It's probably kind of fine. And maybe it's kind of fine to have Affinity as a truly powerful and best deck in the format. Affinity basically set something like a deck that you need to beat in the format. So if you are not able to play around Disciple of the Vault or Kraken Shaman, basically your deck, you know that your deck doesn't stand a lot of changes to get a decent result in Pauper. I think that we will see at least a Stormban, but I'm not sure about other decks. So now we can talk about the MOCS. MOCS stands for Magical Line Showcase Championship, and it's the most important event for Magical Line. You can qualify for this event by Magical Line qualifying events like PTQs and similars. There are only 8 slots available for each MOCS. If I remember correctly, there's a MOCS for each Magical Line season, and it's divided in 2 formats. So there's a, for example, the last MOCS was a 3 Swiss round of Vintage Cube and 3 Swiss round of Modern. These formats can change, for example, Vintage or Pioneer. You can so basically you try to get the better result in Swiss and the better result in Modern, in Vintage Cube and Modern. And if you're able, for example, Nathan's Tower was able to get to get a 3-0 in both formats, you qualify or you won the whole event. If you are not able to get a 3-0 for in each event, in each format, basically there's a final where the 2 best results fight each other. This time Nathan, which was able for the 3rd time in a row to get in the MOCS, was the only winner for each format, and was able, without playing a final, to get the first place. So congrats for Nathan, and then we talk about the first preview of New Capenna. New Capenna seems to be a sort of New York style set. I mean, these planes seems really something from Metropolis, the film, or something from Art Deco, and I do really like these basic lands, but are really weird. So skyscrapers and 18th seems to be something like the main theme of this expansion. Also, we are able to see print the other combination of colors of the triumphs. The first 5 triumphs were printed in Ikoria, and now we are able to see the other triumphs. And I think that's important for expansion for formats like Pioneer, since the modern and legacy fetch lands are not legal in Pioneer. So decks, lands like triumphs, fast lands, check lands, and Fiblet Passage are all really important in this format. And as you can see, we have something like 5 guilds with their ascendancy enchantments, and they didn't really preview with anything else, so I think we talked about anything. So guys, we will I see you next week but I'm not sure how much I will be able to upload on YouTube or stream on Twitch, because I will not able to have a stable internet connection probably. We will see what I will able to do eventually. See ya.